So this video is going to talk through the sources to do with the Sicilian Expedition and a separate but linked event, which is the fortification of Decelea. So Thucydides talks about the Sicilian Expedition in an extraordinary amount of detail in his entire book. I think it takes up an entire section just on its own. We're not going to read obviously all of that because we'd be here forever. What we do read and what the exam board has asked us to look at is some key extracts from the source talking about the Sicilian expedition. And again, with this sort of topic, you can use it in a multiple of different ways, and it does have some overlap with section B about the democracy as a whole as well. So this part of the book skips a little bit, but it gives us a couple of reasons why Athens decided to go to Sicily. So what we do have is the fact that they had been asked to go across initially to Sicily to listen to some complaints of some one of their allies. So the delegation comes back from Sicily and they are accompanied by the Egestians from Egest. And these are the Athenian allies. And the Egestians bring back 60 talents of uncoined silver, which is to pay for some ships. And they were asking the Athenians to send them some ships. Now, the reason why the Egestians were asking for help is basically they were having some issues with other city-states on the island of Sicily, particularly with the main one, which is called Syracuse. And the Athenians and the Egestians had this sort of alliance and treaty, and that's why they were asked to come across and to help them. So that's one of the reasons why they decide to go. Now, during the assembly meetings, remember the assembly decides everything to do with war and peace and whether or not people are going to fight, so on and so forth. So they hold this assembly about what they're going to do about Sicily and Aegistia in particular, or Egesta, technically, sorry. And part of the discussion about some of the reasons why they want to go is because of money. So it's said to be available in large quantities in the treasury and in the temples. So part of the reasons they're asked, another part of it is that they think they're going to get really wealthy out of it. So when we look at causes of conflict and the idea of the fact that places were seen as sort of a source of wealth and resources, the Sicilian expedition is a good example of that particular theme. So because of this money, they decide to send the 60 ships to Sicily, and they appoint 3 commanders. We have a new person for us called Alcibiades. We have Nicias, the guy who wrote the piece of Nicias. And we have another person called Lamachus, who we will probably never refer to ever again. And their reasoning for going officially is to help the Egestians against these guys, which are linked to Syracuse. There's another motive here, sorry, I'll highlight it, I forgot to do it earlier, to re-establish Laetoni, which is another area that's been taken over by the Syracusans, and if things go well, then to sort of take over, make provisions for set tribute, whatever, of Sicily itself in accordance with the interests. So in other words, imperialism, and start to take it over. So there's going to be discussions about whether or not who should go, how much should be sent, and all the rest of it. So Nicias himself doesn't want to go. There are many reasons why he doesn't want to go. One of the major ones, as Thucydides points out, is that he thinks that this is a big mistake, and it turns out to be. Spoiler alert. There's also an issue around Nicias himself, who was getting quite old by this point and was quite unwell. So he doesn't particularly want to go anyway. And he does think that going to Sicily is a huge, huge mistake. So he decides to give this really long speech, which we only have a small extract from, to the Athenian people in the assembly to try and get them to change their minds on this decision. So in his speech, he essentially, to give you a bit of an overview, lays out the massive costs that will be incurred and how sending the ships they were going to send initially is not going to be enough, and they need to send way, way more, and it's going to be really difficult, and yes, there's all this glory and all the rest of it, but it's going to be really, really difficult. So that's kind of like the overview of his speech, so we've got a small extract of it. So there's some really good quotes in here to do with the effects of conflict. So we've only a little respite from a great plague, which obviously had killed off Pericles back in 429, beginning to make good our losses in men and money, so they're just beginning to recover in the war. And we should be thinking about spending it at home rather than helping sort of exiles from a city-state far away from us who are asking for our help. So he's like, we should be focusing on us, not going abroad. He also says that there's someone sitting here who's delighted to be chosen for the command, entirely for his own selfish reasons. So this is a dig at Alcibiades. Nicias and Alcibiades do not get on. They don't like each other. And he's sort of suggesting that Alcibiades wants to go to make some profit out of his appointment. So whether that be his reputation, because it sort of talks about in the source that his reputation is sort of, Alcibiades is known for spending loads of money, being quite extravagant, and people don't really trust him. So maybe he's trying to improve his reputation, and that could be part of the profit, but also to literally make money. So he's saying, we're going out for the wrong reasons, and the commanders who are going out, who've been sent with me, are going for the wrong reasons as well. So, this is like a really stupid idea. And he sort of talks about the fact that they're being pressured into making this decision. So, don't feel like you should be frightened to not vote for war, because this is not the right decision. Our country is now on the verge of the greatest danger she is known. So he's saying, yes, there's great gains, but this is potentially a huge, huge problem for the Athenians if it goes horribly wrong. And he sort of points out that the Egestians started this war, and they should be responsible for spelling error for making peace. So it's not our problem, basically, is his other main argument, which we will highlight because I didn't do that. Hang on, where is it? They must be held responsible for making the peace. So it's their problem, not ours. God, please don't send us. It'd be stupid. So there's the speech, and other people stand up, obviously, because it is a debate about that they should go. So the most ardent supporter of the expedition was Alcibiades, which you already know. He wants to oppose Nicias because he doesn't like him. Hopes will be enough. He hopes that also that if they conquer Sicily, they could also go into Italy and conquer, well, not Carthage in Italy, but in Africa, and also go to Italy afterwards. And he does that in order to bring him great wealth and honour. So like I said, his family reputation is not brilliant. He's rumoured to want to become a dictator, so they turned against him. So he's possibly taken this opportunity to try and improve his personal reputation. We do have an example here about Sicily and Carthage, and Italy later, of Athenian imperialism as being one of the key causes for the Sicilian Expedition. So he also decides to make a speech, as what the Athenians do best. They make speeches. So we don't have Alcibiades' speech in the source book. We don't need to do it. What we do have is that he gives a speech, and Nicias gives his counter speech again, hoping that obviously that the Athenians will be put off by saying, how much it's going to, it's going to be huge. You have to send loads of boats, all the rest of it. Blah blah. Please don't do it. Unfortunately for Nicias, his speech has the opposite effect. So they become more enthusiastic forever. They think, yes, his advice is brilliant because he's pointed out all these problems, so we have to send more forces. He's absolutely right. This is dangerous. We must send more. So his speech has complete, utter opposite effect of what he was hoping to do. It's part because the general masses and average souls sometimes possible getting paid for the time, and adding to the empire to secure permanent employment for the future. So again, we have this idea that the Sicily is seen as a source of wealth and resources. So essentially what they decide to do is follow, in inverted commas, Nicias' advice, and they send extra ships, and they spend extra money, and they hire extra soldiers, and they send an even bigger force to Sicily to ensure that it is successful. So poor old Nicias. And Nicias is still sent in command because he's given such good advice. Alcibiades is also due to go as is Lamachus. So then Thucydides in this section, which is a really long, boring section, not going to lie, talks about the forces that are sent, most costly and finest looking forces troops, planned a view to being away for a long time, equipped for both kinds of fighting, so as in land, sea, besieging, whatever, so every type of fighting needed. That they're going to pay a drachma a day from the treasury, they're going to buy the ships, and that they will kind of talking about the amount of money they need to spend. It's really not a particularly exciting and pretty pointless section. So that's fine. If you want to read it through, that's fine. I should point out there's quite a nice quote here about maybe part of the reason to look more demonstrate the power and greatness of Athens than actually going to take over a place. They look really good because they're spending all this money and all this power and all these boats. And that's what makes it so famous. That is essentially what that bit is talking about. What we do have is an expedition to Sicily. It's been undertaking hopes for the future, i.e. taking over places imperialism, when compared to the most present position with a far-reaching kind. So if they had won, this could be like huge. Could be huge. So then the book, we skip forward quite a lot. So we were in 6.31. We're now 50 chapters later, and there's an Athenian talking to some people in Sicily. So the Sicilian expedition does not go particularly well. It starts off okay. They manage to have a few successes, and then it starts to go wrong really, really quickly. In lesson, we'll talk about the Sicilian expedition in more detail. You don't need to know the ins and outs of what happens. Essentially, you need to know why they went and the effects of it. The bit in the middle, as long as you know the general picture, will be absolutely fine. So again, the Athenians give the official reasons to renew the former alliance with the Aegistians. They've been attacked by the Syracusans, and as I said, things are not going particularly well. They suggest it has these kind of wider points about these kind of racial lines of why war was occurring on. So it points out that we are Ionians, that's the Athenians, and the Peloponnesian are Dorians. So these are two different racial groups in Greece. And it kind of justifies the Athenian Empire. So we built our navy, broke free from the Spartan Empire, from Spartan leadership. That is obviously a reference to the Hellenic League, which we know is not the Spartan Empire at all. But this is kind of how the Athenians now see themselves and their past. We ourselves were appointed to the leadership of those who'd previously been under the King of Persia, so that's talking about the setting of the Delian League. Continue to manage our affairs, we defend ourselves, and we sort of helping the Aegistians. Fine. So that gives you kind of more justification of why they're doing it, because they don't like to see people who are slaves. Slightly ironically, they want to sort of protect Aegistia. We therefore deserve the empire we have. We supplied the cause of Hellas the greatest fleet and courage and never look back. So, i.e., we won the Persian War for them because of our navy. It's also talking about Salamis. Partly because we have the strength to hold our own in relation to the Peloponnese. We've held off the Spartans for so long, and we're doing so really well. And then again, it says it's for our own security that we're in Sicily. Somehow, Sicily is going to be a problem for them if they don't deal with it, which is clearly not true. So if your geography is as bad as mine, just remember Sicily's the ball at the end of the boot of Italy. It's really far away. It's nothing to do with the Athenians, to be completely honest. And this is the justification of the Athenians of why they've come across to help Aegistia. We've come here to settle matters for our own security, not to enslave anybody, but to prevent anyone from being enslaved. Don't think so, Athenians, don't think so. Right, so we need a little bit more context in the story of the Sicilian expedition. So as the Sicilian expedition had set off, there was then a court case brought against Alcibiades. So some statues were defaced in sort of the preparations for the Sicilian expedition. I think they're statues of Hermes. I might be wrong on that. It's one of the gods. And Alcibiades was blamed for this, him and his associates. Now, it is most likely to be a trumped-up charge. He probably didn't do it. I mean, he did a lot of stupid things, but I don't think he was that kind of person who go around defacing statues. So what the Athenian Assembly decides to do is have Alcibiades recalled back to Athens to stand trial. Now, because this is a trumped-up charge, Alcibiades is somewhat justifiably concerned that if he goes back to Athens, then he would be falsely prosecuted and be severely punished. So instead of going back to Athens like he should do, or going into exile, which he could have done, what Alcibiades decides to do is to go to Sparta instead. And this is going to be a pattern of behaviour that we're going to see from Alcibiades. Essentially, Alcibiades looks after Alcibiades, and everyone else around him is just kind of damage control in his behaviour. So Alcibiades in 6.89 is currently in Sparta. He has left Sicily, he has given up the command because he's had to, and he has now exiled himself to Sparta. And when he's in Sparta, he's basically trying to justify the reasons why he's come to Sparta to help them. So, well, possibly to help them. He sort of says, my family had sort of been official representative of Sparta in Athens. So he's got his family background of kind of being linked to Sparta. Hence why I've come to you. I myself took upon my services at your disposal, particularly regarding losses you sustained at Pylos. So he was sort of arguing for the troops to be returned before the Peace of Nikias. I remained anxious to help you throughout. when you made peace with Athens, you negotiate for my personal enemy, says Nicias. Put him in a stronger position and discrediting me. So he's, I've been attacked. It's been really horrible. I've always been opposed to democracy, to dictators. Sorry. He likes democracy as an overall thing, but there are problems in a democracy, and that's the problem. And that's why there are people in Palestine now who try and lead the masses into evil ways, so demagogues. It is the Sicil people who have banished me, i.e. Nicias. He was blaming Nicias. Well, Nicias' members in Sicily, nothing to do with him. But there'll be other people who were part of Nicias' faction, and he's just unhappy. He principles that we should all join together in preserving this form of government. So they do promote democracy. So there's an evidence for political ideology about the Athenians promoting democracies. And he's also saying, it's all well and good, but it does seem to be a bit of a problem. So as a result of this, there's created pressures against me, and no one really likes me, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And he's doing this in order to ensure the Spartans keep him in Sparta, so he doesn't have to go to Athens. So he said Sicily to conquer first, if possible, the Sicilians, and then the Greeks in Italy, and then we intend to start attack the Carthaginian Empire and then Carthage itself. So here's some evidence again about Athenian imperialism as being the true cause of the Sicilian Expedition. And if all this went well, we were then going to attack on the Peloponnese, so the land surrounding Sparta and their allies. So, we get all these sort of wealth and resources from Sicily and then use it to attack other places, particularly you. So in this way, we hope that the war will be easily brought to a successful conclusion, and after we should be the masters of the entire Greek world. So we were going to conquer the world after Sicily. So again, he's kind of playing into, obviously, Sparta's fears, and he's using this in order to convince them to follow a particular policy, which he will get to eventually. So, what you realise that unless you help a Sicily be lost, Syracuse fuse, all Sicily falls with it. And at this point, Syracuse hadn't been doing particularly well against the Athenians, and the tide will soon turn. So he argues you must send out Sicily a force of troops, must send out a commander as a regular Spartan officer to organise troops that are already there already, and then at the same time, this is the important bit as well, the war in Hellas must be carried on more openly. So he's basically telling the Spartans to open up a war with the Athenians on two fronts. Now remember, in the build-up to the Peace of Nicias, that was one of the reasons why they signed the Peace of Nicias, the Athenians, because they were worried about fighting a war on two fronts. So this is what, obviously, Alcibiades is thinking about and thinking, this could be the solution. So in order to carry on war openly, part of that plan is to fortify Thessalia in Attica. And this is the thing, he says, the Athenians have always been most frightened of losing this particular region. So, and the reasons why, there we go, if you take it over, the Athenians will immediately be deprived of their revenues from the silver mines at Laurium, and she will lose her tribute from the allies. So this is the reason why he tells them to do it. So yes, send forces to Sicily and help the Syracusans. Also carry on fighting really hard in the Greek area, and also to fortify this area just above Athens. And that way you will really kind of stranglehold. You would obviously then sort of be very successful over the Athenians. So essentially, Alcibiades tells Sparta what to do. Now, you may be thinking, but why would he do that? Well, partly because he feels aggrieved, because he obviously is being attacked politically. Does he really support Sparta and its oligarchy? No, not really. Alcibiades is doing what Alcibiades needs to do to protect Alcibiades, to be completely honest. And as I said, this is going to be a pattern of behaviour that we will see later on. Now, this next section should really be in a separate video because it's all linked together. I'm just going to do it all in one go. It's just easier for me. So then we have this fortification of Thessalia. So the Spartans have prepared to invade Attica, as they've been asked to do by the Syracusan and the Corinthians. So it's a nice example of allies pushing for conflict because they're telling the Spartans what to do. Alcibiades constantly urging them to fortify the area and carry on the war with vigour, as we know, because you just literally read it up there. So the Athenians have war on two hands, one against them and one against the Sicilians, will now be easy to crush, particularly as Thucydides pointed out in the section on the Sicilian Expedition, that Athens has sent this huge force of some of the best troops to Sicily. So they would be significantly weakened in the Greek area, in the Greek lands. And and they can justify it to themselves because the Spartans consider that Athens has been the first to break the treaty. I mean, this is like 3 years after the treaty had broken down, but they're still going to justify it to themselves. That the Spartans had come out with 30 ships from Argos and laid waste of Epidaurus. And at this point, Sparta had offered to submit to arbitration, and Athens had refused the offer. So they think, right, yeah, we're justified. That's why they decide to listen to Alcibiades' advice. So at this time, they then start to ask their allies for some help. So now we have some Spartan examples of seeing their allies as a source of wealth and resources. So they ask for supplies of iron, and they also ask for some conscripted troops from the Peloponnesian League. So as in resources, they send some soldiers. So it's nice to have a few Spartan examples of this as well. So they decide to go and fortify this particular area. So I'm just reading this section. Some Thracians kind of get involved, not particularly exciting, that bit. So then we have the occupation of Thessalia, as it devastation of property and loss of manpower was one of the chief reasons for the decline of Athenian power. So this is the point of the whole Sicilian expedition, as well as this fortification. It's what Thucydides says is the reason why the Athenians lost the war in the end. Again, spoiler alert. So this is what he blames it. The fortification of the Thessalia is particularly difficult because the enemy was on top of them throughout the year. So when other times when they had the Spartans surrounding Attica, when they're doing their initial raids under the king Archidamos, they would raid, destroy, and leave. Now they fortify this area, they're never leaving. So the Athenians literally can't get away from them. The Spartan king Agis had gone as well and was treating it as a major campaign, so he sees it as a really important thing to do. They've been deprived of the country, more than 20,000 slaves, all the sheep in the animal farm, animals were lost. And the horses they send out to sort of deal with it were being forced to be lame, so they're losing resources. It's being really, really rough on the Athenians, and they're really struggling. On top of that, food supplies that were coming from Euboea. So Euboea was one of the Athenian allies. They had revolted early on, in the First Peloponnesian War, and been forced to stay in the league. They are seen as a source of resources because they supply lots of grain. So the food supplies had originally come through Thessalia, now have to go by sea. So there's extra expenses. So you've got some economic and social effects of conflict. Every single thing that the city had to be imported. So these are huge, huge costs. Summer and winter's no end to the hardships because it's been fortified all year round. What wore them down? They had two wars on their hands at once. So the Athenian army's been split. And the Sicilian expedition, as I said, does not go particularly well. It doesn't go well at all, leading to the Athenians becoming embarrassed financially. Really good effects of conflict quotes. You'll use it a lot. They imposed on their subjects a tax of 5% on all imports and exports by sea, trying to kind of create money to solve their particular problems. So at the end of the Sicilian expedition, all of the commanders are taken captive. So Nicias is taken captive and Lamachus are taken captive, and they are held prisoner. And it's a very sad end to the story of Nicias, really, because he was, he was a successful general, and also he created the peace of Nicias. He ends up dying in a quarry, so he is executed. Which, considering he never wanted to go in the first place, I do feel really sorry for him, because he warned them, he warned the Athenians, and they did not listen to him properly. And that is this is a major turning point then in the Peloponnesian War, as part of the reason why the Athenians, as like I said, and I would agree with Thucydides here, why they lost the war eventually in 403 BC.